I was halfway through building a porch swing for my dog when I looked up and saw a man on my land with a chainsaw. He waved at me like we were old friends. Behind him, an excavator was already tearing into the edge of my vegetable patch. I blinked twice, certain I was having a stroke, until I saw her. Karen Henderson, wearing pearls, heels, and a tracksuit, standing smugly on my property line with a clipboard like she was surveying land for the Queen of England. I walked up, still holding a wrench in one hand, and asked what the hell was going on. Karen gave me a condescending little smile and said, "Oh, didn't you hear? I sold this part of the land to my nephew. It's his now. You'll need to move your fence by Monday." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if this was some kind of hoe-themed prank show, but she was dead serious. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. This was war. Let me rewind about an hour to the part where I thought I was just going to spend the morning in peace. I live on 5 acres of old farmland out on the quieter side of Oak Ridge Valley. Retired life had been treating me well. Sunrises, fresh tomatoes, and the kind of peace city folks only dream of. My dog Leroy had taken to sitting on the porch like an old soul, and I figured it was about time he got his own swing. That's what I was working on when the sound of diesel engines and shouting broke the silence like a slap to the face. I walked toward the edge of my land, and that's when I saw the chaos. They had trucks parked on my grass, a cement mixer idling, and some guy unrolling blueprints on the hood of a pickup. I asked one of the workers what was happening, and he said they were prepping for a foundation pour. I told him he had the wrong address. He told me, very politely, that his boss, Tyler Henderson, owned the parcel. That's when Karen strutted up like she owned the earth itself. "Dan," she said, placing a manicured hand on her chest, "I'm sure you've just lost track. This corner of your land. Well, it was part of our original family homestead. My grandfather owned all this, and there was a clerical mix-up in the 80s when it was sold off. I've spent months getting it back for Tyler. We filed the papers last week. It's all legit." I asked her calmly, because I was still hoping this was a mix-up, if she had a deed or sale agreement. She handed me a thin packet stapled at the top and highlighted like a middle school essay. It was full of vague property descriptions and what looked like a hand-drawn map with arrows pointing to my barn. One note even said, "Prab belongs to us," in the margin. I told her flat out this was garbage. I had the deed, the tax records, and legal title to this entire plot. But Karen just smiled wider. "Maybe you should go check with the county office," she said sweetly. But I wouldn't delay too long. The crew's already booked through the end of the month. Leroy must have sensed the tension because he came trotting up beside me and gave a single low growl. Karen flinched and called for Tyler, who waddled over in camo shorts and a muscle shirt 2 sizes too small. He grinned and offered me a burger. Said he figured the neighbors would want to celebrate the expansion. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked back to my house, my brain already working overtime. Inside, I opened the file cabinet in my office and pulled out the deed. It was clean, no easements, no shared boundaries. Just my name, the coordinates, the sale record from 2015, and everything verified by the town clerk at the time. Wanda, who'd worked there since dial-up internet was considered high-tech. I called her and explained the situation. Her pause was long. Then she sighed. "Karen Henderson again. Lord have mercy. Yeah, Dan, bring that deed in. I want to see what nonsense she's pulling now." I drove into town, fuming but trying to stay calm. I knew I was in the right. But people like Karen operate in the gray areas. Just legal enough to be annoying, just manipulative enough to make people hesitate. I walked into the clerk's office and handed Wanda my documents. She scanned them, pulled up her files, and whistled. "Well, would you look at that?" she said, tapping her monitor. Karen filed a boundary correction form. Tried to backdate it using a 1983 property plat that doesn't even include your land. She say anything about selling it to a family member? Wanda nodded. Claims it was part of a family trust that got misclassified. But she didn't include a trust document, just her word and some notes scribbled in cursive. And Tyler already pulled a temporary construction permit based on it. Can they do that? Technically, it'll hold up for a couple days. But if you've got the original deed and footage. She trailed off. I leaned in. Then what? Wanda looked up. Then I hope you like courtrooms, Dan. Because this one's about to get interesting. Showing possession, we could shut this down quick. I thanked Wanda and got a certified copy of the deed printed along with the original land survey. On the way back, I called Sheriff Maynard, who had dealt with Karen before, during her infamous goose leash dispute. I explained the situation and he said he'd head over. By the time I returned home, the chaos had grown. Tyler had 2 more workers on site, and one of them was running a saw near my split rail fence. Karen waved from a lawn chair like she was hosting a garden party. Dan, she called out, overly cheerful. Just making some improvements. That's when the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the dirt road. Maynard stepped out, hand on his belt, squinting at the scene. You mind telling me what's going on here? Karen launched into her story about ancestral land rights, clerical errors, and how this corner always belonged to the Hendersons. Tyler chimed in, claiming he'd already invested thousands and would sue if I interfered. I handed the sheriff my deed. He read it, glanced back at Karen's handwritten map, then sighed like a man who hadn't had his morning coffee. All right, I'm going to need both parties to stop all work immediately. Dan, if you can bring the official deed copy to town tomorrow, we'll resolve this. Karen folded her arms and huffed. You can't just take his side. Sheriff Maynard looked at her deadpan. Ma'am, I'm not taking sides. I'm taking evidence. And you're building a deck on land you don't own. That's trespassing until proven otherwise. Karen looked like she might combust. Tyler started muttering about lawyers. Me. I just smiled and patted Leroy on the head. Because this wasn't just going to be shut down, it was going to be demolished. I was about to teach Karen a lesson about deeds, law, and what happens when you pick a fight with a man who's got nothing but time, documentation, and a bone-deep hatred for bulldozers on his tomatoes. The next morning I was up before sunrise. Coffee in hand, deed tucked into a folder like it was the Constitution itself. The early morning haze rolled low over my pasture, and for a minute, it almost felt like everything was back to normal. Then I saw Tyler's truck still parked on my grass and the half-built deck, now extended an extra foot into my lawn. He must have worked through the night or hired someone who did. I stood there staring at it like it was a crime scene. It wasn't just arrogance. This was full-blown insanity. These people weren't mistaken. They were bold enough to build on a lie and loud enough to act like it was truth. I drove straight to the county zoning office, determined to put an end to this circus. The place smelled like burnt coffee and toner ink, and the front desk lady barely looked up as I walked in. I asked for the permit office, and after 10 minutes of bureaucracy and waiting room chairs that should be classified as medieval torture devices, I was finally called in. A man named Carl, balding and clearly overworked, sat behind a desk piled with folders, blueprints, and what looked like 3 different takeout containers. He gave me a tired look. What can I help you with? I set the folder on his desk. You can help me shut down an illegal build on my property. He raised an eyebrow, opened the folder, and began scanning the documents. I watched his expression change from bored to curious to concerned. He cross-referenced the parcel numbers with his computer system, then sat back in his chair. Well, damn, he muttered. Looks like someone pulled a fast one. Karen Henderson, I said. Figures, he replied. Her name's been on a few odd requests lately. This permit was expedited through a loophole in our system. It won't hold up. I'll revoke it today and send a notice to cease all work immediately. You'll probably still need to file a formal complaint with the county attorney to press for damages or removal. I'm ready for that, I said. Carl nodded. Then let's make it official. I left that office with more than a paper trail. I left with momentum. By noon, a cease and desist notice was nailed to the post Tyler had used to string up party lights. Karen stood at the edge of her lawn, watching like a hawk, pearl necklace gleaming, heels sinking slightly into the grass. I gave her a friendly wave. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about principle. And I had all the time in the world. Manila folders and energy drink cans surrounded Carl's desk. He looked up with tired eyes when I explained the situation. So this woman, Karen Henderson, submitted a boundary correction and issued a construction permit off it. He nodded. But the land's mine. I've got the deed. I've got the survey. I've lived there for 10 years. There's no confusion, she's just lying. He pulled up the permit in his system. Well, looks like it was processed under a provisional approval. It's flagged now. When that happens, we can't pull it without a hearing or a zoning officer inspection. You can file a formal complaint, though. I handed over my certified deed copy, along with photographing my fence, and even a screenshot from my security cam showing me planting those tomato beds last spring, right in the disputed area. Carl nodded slowly. That'll help. This is going to turn into an administrative nightmare. I can feel it already. Before I left, I stopped by Wanda's office. She had a file on her desk already labeled Henderson Flag Dispute. She looked up over her glasses and gave me that same flat smile, like she'd been expecting me all morning. You were right, she said. Karen submitted a land claim document referencing a defunct plat from 1983. But get this, she forged the signature from the original surveyor. He's dead, and his son, who inherited the business, came in yesterday to dispute it. Said he hasn't done any work for her. We're talking criminal charges if someone wanted to push it. And blinked. So it's not just shady, it's illegal? Wanda shrugged. We can't make that call. But it's more than enough to start an investigation. You want me to send it up the chain? She asked. Absolutely, I said. And get me everything that might connect her to that zoning permit. Later that afternoon, I called an old friend of mine, Bert Finnegan. Bert was a retired land attorney, one of those guys who could quote state law while spitting sunflower seeds and calling you kid. He once sued the state over a drainage issue and made them reroute an entire ditch around a playground. If anyone could unravel this mess, it was Bert. He came over with a thick folder and a thermos full of what he called legal juice, which smelled suspiciously like apple pie moonshine. After a quick walkthrough of the property and a good belly laugh over the slapdash construction job Tyler had started, Bert sat down on my porch and flipped through the deed, tax records, zoning files and photos. She's got nothing, he said flatly. This isn't even a good scam. But what she does have is momentum. That permit gives her just enough false legitimacy to make people hesitate. And if folks hesitate long enough, she might just get her way through apathy. I asked him what we could do. Well, first, he said, we file an injunction. That stops all construction. Second, we hit zoning with a cease and desist request based on fraud. And third, we embarrass her publicly. Sometimes justice works better when there's an audience. Bert wasn't wrong. Karen's power came from her ability to act like she was always right. People like her depended on silence and politeness to push their lies forward. If you challenged them head-on and shined a light on the rot, they shriveled like spoiled fruit. Later that evening, I typed up the official cease and desist Bert had prepared and posted copies on the construction site, on my fence, and right at the mailbox Tyler had installed like he was claiming the land on behalf of some third-world empire. I also installed new motion lights, more cameras, and a no trespassing sign the size of a barn door. That night Karen showed up. I heard her heels clicking down the gravel path like she was entering a courtroom. She came straight to my porch, didn't even knock, and just started in. You're being ridiculous, she said. This could have been handled civilly. I looked at her, all pearls, perfume and illusion, and said, you literally forged a document and lied to the county. She waved her hand like I was discussing the weather. It's complicated. The boundary lines are historically fuzzy. Besides, Tyler's already spent a lot of money. He has a right to be here. I handed her a copy of the injunction. He'll get his money back when he sues you. This land's mine. It's always been mine. And I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes narrowed. You're making a huge mistake. I'm connected in this town. I serve on 2 committees. People respect me. Yeah, said. Ask Sheriff Maynard how much that respect's worth when he's writing up a trespassing report. Her face turned red, a mix of rage and fear flashing across it like a lightning storm. She opened her mouth like she wanted to shout, then just spun on her heel and stormed back down the path, yelling for Tyler to get the damn truck. The next morning, Sheriff Maynard called me. He said he'd received Karen's evidence and wanted me to come in and officially file a complaint with supporting documentation. I packed up every sheet, printout, photo, and copy I had and drove straight to the sheriff's office. When I arrived, Karen was already there. Tyler sat beside her, chewing gum and looking bored. She handed over her file with a triumphant smirk, but Maynard didn't even glance at it. He waited until I sat down and then asked, "Dan, you got that deed?" I laid it out like a royal flush at a poker table. Within minutes, Maynard's tone changed. He turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask your nephew to stop all work immediately. If there's further dispute, it needs to go through the courts. But unless you can produce legal ownership, this is trespassing." Karen gaped at him like he'd spoken ancient Greek. "But I told you, it's a family claim." Maynard folded his arms. "And I told you, claims aren't facts. You've got 72 hours to remove anything you've built. After that, we file charges." As I walked out, Tyler glared at me like I'd just stolen his lunch. Karen sat stiff as a board, jaw clenched, eyes filled with fury. But I didn't say a word. Because justice doesn't always need a speech. Sometimes it just needs a good deed. You'd think after being served an official warning by the sheriff, most people would back off, maybe take a walk, drink some tea, reevaluate their life choices. But not Tyler. And definitely not Karen. The very next day, I came out to find he'd added a second deck frame, a half-built outdoor kitchen, and, God help me, a lawn flamingo. It was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum in architectural form. I didn't even bother getting mad. I just stood there, coffee in hand, watching the spectacle like it was some off-brand home improvement reality show. The cherry on top. Karen had put up a temporary fence made of neon orange plastic, the kind you'd find around a sinkhole or a construction site. She'd planted a cardboard sign in front of it that read, "Private Property, Henderson Estate." That was it. We were no longer dealing with a misunderstanding or a property dispute. This had turned into full-on lunacy. I went back inside and called Bert. He answered on the first ring and said he'd already heard about it. Apparently, the sheriff's deputy, who also happened to be Bert's cousin, had driven past and spotted Tyler installing a grill. Bert chuckled and said, "Well, if they're going to cook, we might as well give them something to chew on." He was already preparing paperwork for a formal injunction filing at the county courthouse. Meanwhile, I had a different idea. I wasn't just going to stop them, I was going to catch every stupid, incriminating thing they did on camera. I headed to the hardware store and bought 2 new motion-activated trail cams, the kind hunters use to spot deer at night. I positioned one in the tree line facing their construction zone and another near my fence line. I also upgraded my motion sensor lights and connected everything to my phone. Now, every time Tyler sneezed in my direction, I'd get a notification. Leroy seemed pleased with this development. He'd taken to barking at Tyler every time he appeared, which only made Tyler shout back and call him a menace. Karen, naturally, claimed I was training the dog to be aggressive. I ignored them both. By midweek, Tyler hosted what he referred to as a land-blessing barbecue, no invitations, no permits, and definitely no cents. I counted 17 people standing on my land, paper plates in hand, laughing like they were celebrating a birthday. Karen had strung up fairy lights and stood on the half-finished deck holding a mason jar like it was a toast. I caught it all on video, every last second, including the moment when the temporary fence collapsed and 2 kids fell into my tomato patch, crushing my heirloom seedlings. Leroy tried to help by barking the kids back onto the deck, but that only made Karen scream about calling animal control. The next morning I went back to zoning with Bert. We brought everything: documents, photos, videos, timestamps, even soil surveys that showed my continual use of the land. Carl at the desk just sighed when he saw me walk in. "I was wondering when you'd be back," he muttered. We handed him the footage of the illegal party, complete with grills, lighting rigs, alcohol, and full structures going up. Without any inspection, he looked like he wanted to slam his head against his keyboard. "Okay," he said. "This is more than enough. We're revoking their provisional permit effective immediately. I'll have someone out there to post the stop work order within the day." True to his word, by that afternoon a county building inspector pulled up in a dusty SUV and started stapling red tags to everything on Tyler's side: the grill, the frame, even the ridiculous flamingo. Tyler came storming out in his signature sleeveless shirt and demanded answers. The inspector didn't even look up from his clipboard. Unpermitted structure, no verified ownership, and open code violations. He said flatly, "This whole thing is coming down," Tyler argued, but when the inspector mentioned possible fines for continuing construction, he backed off, though not without muttering something about getting a real lawyer and owning this whole valley soon. Karen, as expected, tried a different tactic. That evening she knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and a fake smile stretched so thin you could see the fury underneath. I opened the screen door just a crack. "Dan," she said, "maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Family matters are complicated. Land can be emotional, but there's no need for this to get ugly. It's already ugly," I said, "and the sheriff, the county, and the courts all agree whose land it is." She looked past me, eyes scanning my living room like she was measuring the curtains. "We could settle this quietly, no lawyers. I could offer you a buyout. Tyler really needs this place." "I really don't care," I said, shutting the door gently but firmly. The next day Bert filed the injunction paperwork with the county involved and the journey a story with correct punctuation and without heading. The permit was revoked, and Karen and Tyler were officially banned from continuing any work. But instead of stepping back, Tyler decided he'd just keep building anyway. He must have figured that if he moved fast enough, he could finish the place before enforcement kicked in. I watched through my phone as he dragged new lumber onto the property after sunset and started hammering under the floodlights. He was breaking the law and didn't care who saw it. That's when Leroy became the unexpected hero of the week. Around midnight, Tyler snuck back onto my land with a few friends, trying to do some quiet construction. They didn't count on my dog Leroy. Half asleep on the porch, he heard them rustling in the dark and bolted across the lawn, barking like he was guarding Fort Knox. Tyler screamed like a child, tripped over a stack of lumber, and dropped a toolbox onto his foot. One of his buddies ran straight into the neon plastic fence and tangled himself up like a fly in a web. It was pure chaos, and yes, I caught all of it on camera. The next morning I posted the footage to a private neighborhood watch group online. Spread like wildfire. The caption I used was simple: "Illegal midnight construction attempt on my land." Thank God for Leroy. People were already annoyed with Karen, and this sealed the deal. Comments poured in, folks laughing at Tyler's fall, people offering Leroy dog treats, and more than a few neighbors sharing their own horror stories about Karen's antics over the years. To make things worse for them, the building inspector returned that same afternoon. After reviewing the footage and seeing the site in person, he didn't just threaten fines. He began the process of issuing a demolition order. Tyler stood there, slack-jawed, while Karen screamed at the inspector that it was a personal vendetta orchestrated by land thieves and gossip mongers. I didn't say a word. I just sat on my porch swing with Leroy, sipping sweet tea, watching the red tags flap in the wind. Every moment they stayed on my land now counted against them. Every hammer they swung was another nail in their legal coffin. And the best part, I hadn't laid a finger on them. I just let the law, the cameras, and their own arrogance do all the work. But I knew Karen wouldn't go down easy. She'd already spent too much energy crafting this fantasy. The storm wasn't over. It was just gathering more thunder. By the end of the week, the demolition tags were starting to fade from the rain, but Tyler's determination hadn't. In fact, the insanity hit a new level when I walked out one morning to find a pop-up canopy planted right in front of the half-built deck, still on my land, with a big laminated sign hanging from it that read, "Henderson Family Heritage Site." I thought maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I'd finally snapped from all the stress. But no, there it was, clear as day, with folding chairs, a photo display of Karen's relatives, and even a small podium. Karen had gone full delusional. Not only was she claiming the land, but she was now turning it into some sort of historical shrine to justify staying on it. Later that morning, a small group of people arrived. Distant relatives, maybe, or actors, I wasn't sure. They gathered around Karen while she gave a dramatic speech about her great-grandfather's legacy and how the land was stolen through bureaucratic fraud and clerical negligence. She even held up an old photo of a barn and claimed it had once stood on that very soil. Never mind that the background in the photo looked nothing like my property. There was a water tower in it. We don't even have one in this part of the county. Then came the so-called family historian, a hunched man in a tweed jacket with elbow patches and wild hair, who introduced himself as Dr. Calvin Bramble, though I later found out he wasn't a doctor of anything. He spoke for 20 minutes about land ownership being fluid, about oral histories being more reliable than paper deeds, and about ancestral vibrations. At one point, he asked everyone to close their eyes and hum so they could feel the spirit of the land. I stood there, watching with Leroy by my side, both of us equally baffled. But what happened next took things from eccentric to dangerous. As I turned to head back inside, I saw Tyler with a shovel, digging along my fence line. Not just near it, right through it. I shouted at him to stop, but he just smirked and said he was reclaiming the old boundary. I called the sheriff immediately. Clean arrived 20 minutes later, and to his credit, he didn't even try to pretend he understood what was happening. He walked straight up to Tyler, asked for his permit, and when Tyler refused to stop digging, issued him a citation on the spot for destruction of property. Karen came storming over, outraged, clutching the laminated photo of her ancestors' barn like it was sacred scripture. She screamed about injustice and family legacy, accused me of cultural erasure, and declared that I was violating heritage rights, whatever that meant. The deputy told her plainly again that the land wasn't hers, that she had no legal claim, and that every time she or Tyler touched it, they risked criminal charges. She swore she'd take it to court, to the state, to the governor himself if she had to. I don't think I've ever seen anyone so committed to being wrong. That evening, Bert showed up at my place with a thick envelope and a grin. Inside were court papers, official notice of the upcoming hearing regarding the ownership and illegal activity on the property. He'd pulled every record, every photo, every time-stamped document we had. "It's airtight," he said. "They can dance, they can lie, they can hum to the dirt all they want, but in that courtroom, facts win." We walked the property together, reviewing where things stood. The half-built deck was still up but sagging after a heavy rain. The outdoor kitchen was just a grill on brick. The flamingo had been stolen by a raccoon. Yet Karen still walked the perimeter every evening like a monarch inspecting her kingdom. That night, I caught her trying to plant a fake survey stake behind my shed. She spotted the motion light and bolted like a raccoon herself, tripping over a pile of plywood and vanishing into the woods. On the day of the court hearing, I arrived early with Bert, who wore his best blue tie and carried a briefcase that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. Karen showed up 15 minutes late, dragging Tyler and the fake historian behind her. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too small and had an American flag pin on her lapel like this was some kind of civil rights trial. The courtroom was small. Just a local judge, a clerk, a bailiff, and a few curious townsfolk who'd heard about the drama and showed up like it was free entertainment. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no tolerance for nonsense, asked us to begin. Bert calmly presented our case. Photos, documents, deed history, tax records, video footage, even Leroy's motion-triggered clips of Tyler sneaking around in the night. It was quiet, professional, airtight. Then it was Karen's turn. She began by waving the laminated photo. Then she cried. Then she claimed she'd been coerced into giving the land away by her ex-husband in the 90s, though no one could figure out what that had to do with anything. Dr. Bramble launched into a rambling explanation of ancestral truths and spiritual borders, and the judge stopped him mid-sentence to ask if he was a licensed surveyor. When he said no, she told him to sit down. Tyler tried to argue that he'd spent money on the land and should therefore own part of it. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked him if he typically claimed property by building on it without permission. He just shrugged. That didn't help. After a short recess, the judge returned with her ruling. She slammed the gavel once, then looked Karen straight in the eyes and said, "This case is a textbook example of manufactured entitlement and fraudulent behavior. Mr. Dan is the sole legal owner of the property in question. Ms. Henderson, Mr. Tyler, and anyone acting on their behalf are to vacate immediately, remove all unpermitted structures within 10 business days, and are hereby fined for trespassing and property damage. Karen's face went pale. Tyler looked like he might cry. Dr. Bramble whispered something about injustice and walked out mumbling. I stood up, thanked the judge, and shook Bert's hand. It was over. Finally, after weeks of lies, nonsense, and fairy tales about vibrating soil, the truth had won. Outside the courthouse, a local blogger stopped me for a quote. I just said, "I never wanted a fight, I just wanted my land. But if you're going to come swinging, don't bring a feather to a fencing match." By the time I returned home, Tyler's truck was gone. The deck was abandoned. Karen's sign had fallen down in the wind. And Leroy, he was asleep on the porch, snoring like a freight train. I sat next to him, pulled out my phone, and opened the video app. I had hours of footage, dozens of clips, and enough material to tell the world exactly what kind of madness had unfolded on this property. But for now, I just pressed play on the one where Tyler fell into the tomato patch, and I laughed. Not out of spite but relief. The storm had finally passed. The silence that settled over my property after the court ruling was almost unnerving. For weeks, my mornings had begun with engine noise, hammering, shouting, and the occasional sound of Karen's shrill voice slicing through the air like a weed whacker tangled in barbed wire. Now there was nothing but birdsong, the rustle of wind through the trees, and the occasional lazy bark from Leroy when a squirrel got too confident. The Henderson Heritage site had vanished overnight. Folding chairs. Fake podium. Even the cursed flamingo finally disappeared. All that remained was a sagging deck frame, half-rotted by rain and indignity. 10 business days. That was the judge's deadline. They cleared out in 2. Karen didn't even show her face during the teardown. She must have sent Tyler and a couple of his friends in the dead of night to dismantle what they could and haul it away under the cover of darkness. My cameras caught them fumbling around with flashlights, tripping over boards, cursing, and at one point accidentally backing a trailer into the plastic fence. Tyler slipped twice in the mud and face planted once into a puddle. I didn't stop them. I didn't say a word. I just let the footage roll, sipping coffee on my porch as Leroy kept watch with a look of calm authority that only dogs and judges can pull off. On the morning of the final day, the inspector returned, walked the site, and confirmed that all unauthorized structures were removed. He handed me a signed report and gave me a nod that said more than words ever could. I thanked him, and as he left, he looked back and said, "Let me know if she ever tries to build a pyramid out here. Wouldn't put it past her." I laughed harder than I had in weeks. But the aftermath wasn't just about returning to peace. The damage done needed cleaning up. My tomato beds were a wreck, my fence was still partially destroyed, and the land where Tyler had poured footers looked like a battlefield. I spent the next few days clearing debris, pulling up rebar, and tossing broken boards into a burn pile. Every nail I yanked out was like pulling a thorn from a wound, and with every bit of trash I removed, the place started to feel like mine again. Not just legally but spiritually, like the land itself was exhaling for the first time in a month. Bert came by a few days later with a small gift, a weatherproof no trespassing sign that looked like it belonged at Fort Knox. We walked the edge of the property together, checking my cameras, tightening fence posts, and setting up a new gate with a code lock. Not because I was worried Karen would come back, but because peace is something worth protecting once you've earned it. Then something unexpected happened. I got a letter, handwritten on lined paper in crooked capital letters. It was from Tyler. He apologized not for everything but for enough. He said Karen told him the land was legally hers and that she'd taken care of all the paperwork. He admitted he never looked into it himself, that he was just excited to finally own something. He said he'd never been given land before and wanted to prove to his dad that he could build a home. He said the lies spun out of control before he realized what was happening, and by then, he didn't know how to stop. The last line read, "I know you probably hate me, but I hope your dog is doing okay. He's a good one. I sat on my porch with a letter in one hand and Leroy's head resting on the other. And for a moment, I didn't feel angry. Just tired. 'Cause people like Karen, they come and go. But people like Tyler, sometimes they're just looking for a place to belong and end up believing the wrong person. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw the letter away either. I folded it neatly and stuck it in the back of my deed folder. A reminder of how close peace can come to being taken, and how satisfying it is to fight for it. Later that week, Sheriff Maynard dropped by. He'd been following the mess from the beginning and wanted to see how everything turned out. I offered him a chair, a cold tea, and a front row seat to a fully restored fence line. He looked around, nodded slowly, and said, "Well, you held your ground better than most. We've had people cave over less." "I didn't really have a choice," I said. "This place is all I've got." He sipped his tea and looked out at the rolling hills, the orchard line, and the half-rebuilt tomato bed. "You ever think maybe the land had your back too?" Chuckled. "If it did, it sure let me do all the heavy lifting." He laughed and raised his